But anyway, I think we'll go ahead and get started today. Uh, Thanks everybody for being here. I'm Susan Demas, the CEO and executive editor of Lincoln Square. And joining me today is somebody that I've known for about a decade. Abdul El-Sayed is a physician who ran for Michigan governor in 2018 as a Democrat, and now he is seeking Michigan's open U.S. Senate seat for 2026. And in the past, he has served as the director of the Department of Health, Human, and Veteran Services for Wayne County, as well as the City of Detroit's health director. And he has a book, which you can probably see in the background, Medicare for All, a Citizen's Guide. So welcome, Abdul.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's a privilege to be with you. Just grateful for this space and honored to get to share it with you today.
Oh, thank you. Just before we begin, I do want to observe the equal time rule and note that the other candidates running for Senate in Michigan are on the Democratic side, State Senator Mallory McMorrow, Congresswoman Haley Stevens, and State Representative Joe Tate. For Republicans, the only declared candidate is former Representative Mike Rogers, but Congressman Bill Huizenga is also considering a run. And of course, we invite all these candidates to join us on Lincoln Square in the future. Um, so obviously, let's jump into Trump's big, beautiful bill. Hours ago, the Republicans in the US House, by a squeaker, passed his sweeping budget bill. Obviously, we don't know everything that's in it. Even many members of Congress fully admit that they don't know. But we do know that this includes just massive cuts to health care. There's about a half trillion cuts to Medicare. Millions are going to be thrown off of their health insurance through Medicaid. And all of this is basically to give billionaires like Elon Musk another tax cut. So what does all this mean for Americans and what can we do about it?
Yeah, well, it certainly was big, right? 100 pages or 1,000 pages, and the estimate is it's going to add $3 trillion to the deficit, which last I checked, Republicans always seem to complain about when we're in a Democratic administration, and always seem to conveniently ignore when they're in power. And then the question of like why we're taking on that deficit is the big one. I saw an analysis recently that this is going to mean a net loss of 4% of the average annual income for families living in the bottom 10% of our income brackets, and then a net increase of 2% for those living in the top 10%. So this is literally a regressive transfer of resources, an addition of $3 trillion to our debt, and all for what, right? This is Republicans who disproportionately their voters rely on programs like SNAP and Medicaid. I just want to stop here for a second and just explain Medicaid because I think it's really important for
Right.
folks to understand what we're talking about here. Medicaid's often billed as a health insurance program for low income people. Medicaid is a lot more than that, right? Yes, it does cover lower income people, but it also covers one in every two kids in Michigan. It's also the principal means of reimbursement for most rural hospitals in our communities. It's also accounts for about 80% of the mental health infrastructure in our country. And I just want you to understand what happens, right? If you were to gut, if you're you this passes the Senate, if they gut Medicaid, that means we're going to see a number of rural hospitals shut down, which is why Josh Hawley, nobody's idea of a progressive, came out against this. We're going to see them shut down, and that means that people who get strokes or heart attacks in disproportionately Republican districts are going to find themselves driving not 2 hours, but 4 hours.
Right.
You're going to see a whole lot more unemployment given the fact that these hospitals tend to be the second biggest employers in their communities. And then we're going to watch programs like special needs programs for kids in schools or mental health infrastructure just shut down. That's what they're trying to do, all so that they can pass a tax cut for their donors, right? So this is a transfer on the part of Republican representatives of healthcare and support services from their voters for a tax cut for their donors, who are some of the richest people in the country. There is nothing beautiful about this. It certainly is big, but there's absolutely nothing beautiful about it. It is a big, hideous bill. I do hope that the Senate can do the right thing on this. I am I'm given some hope by the courage of folks like Josh Hawley and others to call this what it is. But this is a moment right now where it's a bit break glass when it comes to the well-being of everyday folks in our country.
Right. You obviously come from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and both of your campaigns have been endorsed by Bernie Sanders. Um, you've been a big critic of Democrats for not being progressive enough and not fighting back against right wing policies. So, do you feel that this has gotten worse under Trump 2.0? And who is fighting back right now? And what are they doing that's effective and really resonating with people?
Yeah, Susan, I want to say three things about this. Number one, I think the part of the challenge right now is sometimes shifts in our politics happen slowly, so we don't always clock them for what they are. And I
Hmm.
worry that right now what's happened is that Republicans have become MAGA, and then there are a lot of Democrats who want to become Republicans.
Mm.
And I'm just saying, let's let Democrats be Democrats again. And I don't. I sometimes have trouble with the sort of left-right divide only because I think it's a model that we superimpose on our politics to help to make them more understandable for folks who consume politics every day. I think for most people out there, they're not always thinking left or right. I think the bigger divide right now is, do you work for people who have to show up to work tomorrow, or do
Hmm.
you work for people who don't? And when I think about the policies that I support, the reasons why Senator Sanders has endorsed my campaigns, I want an economy that works for working people. And what that means to me is that you have the right to join or form a union. It means that this should be the best single place to build and scale a small business in the world, and that our economy should be built on those small businesses. It means guaranteeing healthcare for people in the richest, most powerful country in the world. It means protecting our air, water, and soil rather than the incomes of regulated utilities that get to just raise our rates, despite the fact that they don't do almost anything to reduce the number of electricity losses that we experience, like if the wind blows here in Michigan. And I just think that those are traditional Democratic policies, and I want us to be fighting on them. And part of that is also a process argument, right? Which is sort of the third point I want to make.
Hmm.
The challenge is that too often, I think, when people experience Democrats, like if you go to a town hall or you're watching an ad that a Democrat makes, we tend to have these sort of like 30,000-foot view arguments and positions, which represent the way that too many Democrats end up having to try and triangulate
Hmm.
between what they think voters want and then what their donors want. And by donors,
Hmm.
I mean corporations who write PAC checks. And so you find yourself saying not much at all, but saying it
Hmm.
because a consultant told you to say it with a lot of enthusiasm, which is makes us sound ridiculous. And my point is that if you believe in an economy for working people, protecting air, water, and soil, guaranteeing healthcare, you should not be taking PAC checks from the very people who monetize us and deny us of those basic things. And so
Hmm.
there is a process element to this. And one of the things I did learn in 2018 is that, too often we say what we're against, and I'd much rather be about saying what I'm for.
Hmm.
So I'm for a system where we ask, in a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, we ask the people to fund a campaign that is about listening to people, surfacing their challenges, and answering them directly in the kind of public policy we can pass. And I hope that's what Democrats can be about. And my job is to help and to engage on a campaign that calls us to that, and do our best to be able to both win a primary and then beat Mike Rogers and serve in accordance with what the people of the state of Michigan want.
What leaders are getting it right? And really, you can go back through history too. I mean, are there leaders that you really, would like to be in the mold of if,
Yeah.
you were elected?
You think about a Paul Wellstone or a
Hmm.
Philip Hart, like these were folks who were the conscience of the Senate. And the thing about them is that you knew that when they spoke not just from here, they spoke from here.
Hmm.
And I think those things are really important. Obviously, I've got a lot of love for my mentor and friend and supporter, Bernie Sanders. I think he is
Hmm.
somebody who has, been saying the same things and saying them honestly for literally the better part of the last century. And I draw a lot of heart from that. I think about my friend AOC. I think a lot of folks will ask, and there's a lot of questions about what her next step is, et cetera. But if you really
Hmm.
go back down, and you ask what she's saying, she's talking about experiences that would have benefited her family and her. as somebody who was a working person before she ran an insurgent campaign and got elected to Congress. Um, and so, I think we have a long history in our state and in our region of producing the kind of senators who call our country and call the Senate to the highest
Mhm.
ideals, the better angels of our nature. And I hope to be able to follow in their footsteps.
I do want to just talk briefly about Michigan's governor, Gretchen Whitmer, and you ran against her in the Democratic primary in 2018. And she was, known as that woman from Michigan during Trump's term, and she really went toe to toe with him all the time. There's definitely been a different tone this term. It's been very conciliatory. She's been to the White House, kind of got roped into a photo op there. Do you think she's making a mistake here? What kind of example do you feel like she is providing for the people of Michigan?
I'll tell you this, I've been in public service for the past 10 years in some way or another. And one of the things I know is that you don't always know what another public servant is facing and what
Hmm.
they're trying uh, to 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 work around. I do not serve as governor of Michigan. We had a very energetic primary, and she won that race, and she's gone on to serve our state with I think courage and conviction. And so, in some respects, I think it's not my place to say, what is she doing right or wrong. I think
Hmm.
she's trying to do the best by the people she serves in the state of Michigan. What I can tell you is that she has a very different role than the one that I'm running for. As a governor of your state, you are the executive officer whose responsibilities are really focusing on the ability to operate state government for the best of the people in our state that we serve. As a senator, your job is oversight, right? And I think the role that I would be running for would demand a far greater sense of the need to stand up against this administration, to call out the excesses of the ways that they're shredding our Constitution or making the economy simply worse for working people. Or taking away healthcare for every other kid in our state, or gutting critical programs like SNAP that does nothing but like literally put food on the table for families across our country. And so, what I can tell you is that, as a U.S. senator, I understand that there's a procedural part of my job, which is going to be writing up legislation and passing that legislation. But there's a leadership part of my job. You are
Hmm.
one of two statewide representatives for your state whose responsibility it is, that is drawn up in Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, to lead and represent at the highest levels in our government. And so, I think that there is a real responsibility to recognize that this is not a normal moment. This is not a normal administration, and we cannot treat it as such. And so, you can't mistake the procedural parts of your job for the leadership parts of your job. And the ability to drive and move a conversation about just how abnormal this is and about how
Hmm.
dangerous some of the precedents are that they're setting.
Yeah, I did want to talk to you a little bit about, you running for Senate because, I know that you're someone who wants to get big things done. When you ran for governor, you ran on put a plan for Medicare for all in Michigan. And I remember you would use the hashtag done waiting, in your social media posts. And so, well, governors can take executive actions, even if the legislature, won't act on some of their bills. The Senate really is not known for moving quickly on anything.
Right.
It's full of Chuck Schubers and Dick Durbins, even though Durbin is not running for reelection. So, how would you change things in the Senate so that you could get more done? Is it time for Schumer to go? Would you kill the filibuster? What else would you want to do?
So I'll tell you this, I think the filibuster has has never been the shining example of democracy in action. I think it has been used throughout history to choke out options and opportunities for more progressive legislation. I also think it's fundamentally anti-democratic because it puts a stopper on the ability of the democratic process to distinguish and identify those who are for legislation and those who are against. Right? When you have a filibuster process, the folks who disagree with certain legislation can just hide behind the filibuster. And so you don't get a situation where they have to be accountable to the people. Now,
Right.
I understand that a lot of folks would say, well, Abdul, they've got a Republican trifecta, right? And don't you think that if there, but for the filibuster, we'd be saying far worse out of the Senate? I would say yes, but at least we'd be transparent about who stood where, and then
Mm,
we would allow the democratic process to work itself out. You don't like what that senator voted for, make sure that you vote them out next time. And I think that over time, more democracy is always better. As far as leadership goes, look, I know what I'm running to do, and I will support whoever it is that gives us the best chance at passing and driving that legislation. So a lot of folks focus on current leader Schumer, and I'd say
mhm,
really to me depends on right what the options are. So anybody who
mhm.
tells you that I'm decidedly going to vote against one person is not thinking through the potential where the other person who's up for leadership may actually be worse on the issues that you want to advance. And so I'm just not going to
Who would
hamstring
be
myself that way.
worse?
Fetterman, right? If it was a Schumer versus a Fetterman, I'm making my choice there. So when I think about folks that I'm really excited about, I think about a Van Hollen, right?
Mm,
And how excited I'd be there. Or Bernie Sanders. I mean, I don't know that he's interested in the role, but I'm looking for whichever leader shows me that they have both the heart and the mind to be able to achieve the set of goals that I have for Michigan and our country, the goals that I'm running on here. The other part of this that I just think is important to remember is that change doesn't happen all at once.
mhm,
And as much as we're done waiting, I think the work of persuading folks, right? Maybe this is just me getting older, right? This is 40-year-old Abdul with two kids and a mortgage rather than 32-year-old Abdul from the basement of his in-laws home. I understand that persuasion is absolutely critical in the democratic process, and persuasion takes time. And one of the most important things that a senator can do is to be a explainer for the public policy that he believes or she believes is in the best interest of the communities that they serve. And one of the things I hope I can do, right, as somebody who has spent a lot of time studying and writing on and talking on public policy, is to have that conversation with the American public, is to move the thinking around what we can do to make our lives that much better, right? It shouldn't be this hard to afford your groceries. It shouldn't be this hard to go see a doctor without worrying about debt. It shouldn't be this hard to believe that the job you have today will be the job you have tomorrow and that you can afford your life. It shouldn't be this hard to buy a house if you're like under the age of 40. And it doesn't have to be. And I think
mhm,
having that conversation with folks and building the public discussion and the public opinion around moving legislation is part of the job. And that's
mhm.
why I kind of love the fact that this is a 6-year term because it does take time.
Right.
But it also takes all of us who believe in these policies working to have that conversation with public. And it's a space where I think I could excel as a senator.
Yeah. During the last election, we saw that there were a lot of voters who were very alienated on the left, right, independent voters. And definitely there were plenty of people who wanted the system burned to the ground. But with Trump hollowing out everything from the State Department to the Department of Education and killing USAID, life-saving scientific research, this is really leaving massive gaps where real work was getting done. So on day one of your term in the US Senate, how would you deal with all of this that Trump and Doge and Elon have created? And what would be your top legislative priorities?
So forgive me a medical analogy here is you got to stop the bleeding, right? And then you've got to identify the source and then you've got to do the repair. And I think I hope that I'll get elected in a wave election where we will take back both the House and the Senate. And I understand that all the prognosticators think that's really difficult, but I also see what's in front of me. I see where people are, and I recognize that the degree of anger and frustration, the recognition that this is not the America that you want to raise your kids in, I think is going to deliver a real wave election. And so how I hope I get elected with a number of folks who are interested in stopping that bleeding. And I think having control of the House and Senate, the amount of oversight that you can do is absolutely critical. So that oversight, I think, comes as number one. I hope that obviously the committee that I'm probably best suited for is health, education, labor, and pensions help. And I think starting to right size and rebuild from what RFK and Doge and Elon Musk have done and are doing, I think is critical.
Mhm.
There's a couple of, from a legislative standpoint, a couple of pieces of legislation that I really believe in. It's not one or two, it's more like three or four. The first is we got to get right on the corrupting role of money in politics, standing up against Citizens United. And although I understand that the precedents set by this court to interpret the 14th Amendment
Mhm.
as calling a corporation a person and the First Amendment is calling their money speech,
Mhm.
are problematic, and that this court is unlikely to overturn those precedents. I think we got to try. And I think that starts with legislation that forces them to confront those ideas because of, frankly, how politically problematic they've become and how they've corrupted our politics. Number two, obviously, I literally wrote the book on Medicare for All. I believe deeply that we need to drive it. And I understand that we probably don't have the numbers of votes, but I want to have the conversation with the American public to drive their elected officials to start talking about the fact that right now our health insurance system is unsustainable. We pay more than any other high income country in the world for worse care. We have some of the longest waiting lines in the world. We don't want to believe it, but if you need to see a cardiologist, the average wait time to see a cardiologist, and by the way, nobody has a cardiology visit that is just like, well, get to it when you need to get to it. When you
Mhm.
need to see your cardiologist, you need to see your cardiologist. 2.5 months to see a cardiologist. And so I think that is a second huge priority. Third, it is too hard to form and to join a union. I believe deeply in the PRO Act, and it is something that I would want to champion from day one, which opens up and expands and union rights in this country. I think we need to start thinking about unionization in other sectors. Specifically as someone who went to medical school, I think doctors need to start unionizing more often now.
Mm.
Doctors are not they're not working for other doctors in the sort of guild model in the past. They work for large health systems that have been consolidating in ways that suppress their wages, and leave them in situations where they just cannot provide adequate medical care. I'd love to see physicians unionize, and I'd love to be able to empower that in the legislature.
Do you think that
And
that would help with trying to get more people into family practice, general practice? Because obviously there's a lot more money in specialties like plastic surgery, for instance.
Yeah, no, I think what would really help on that front is Medicare for all. I do think unionization would probably help too. To get to that question, the reason that that happens is because the AMA, which still claims to speak on behalf of physicians, but increasingly does not, given its representation, is they have a role in helping to shape reimbursement rates across specialties, and they are disproportionately empowering specialists, right? So the
Mhm.
plastic surgeries, the orthopedic surgeries, et cetera, the plastic surgeons, orthopedic surgeons, et cetera, into positions where they have a disproportionate impact on reimbursement rates. So reimbursement for specialists is substantially higher than it is for family practice. But we know that in our healthcare system, you would much rather be in a situation where you didn't need a surgery in the first place, right? Because you got your problem taken care of in primary care rather
Mhm.
than having to wait to actually get the surgery. And so I think we need to right size that. And I think under Medicare for All, you can start to really rethink reimbursement schedules, and you can uproot the way that the AMA has instantiated itself in this system to the benefit of specialists over primary care providers. But I really appreciate that point.
So we've mostly, really primarily been talking about domestic policy, and that's what most campaigns are about. But Trump has made some very major decisions in terms of our foreign policy, isolating us from our traditional allies, and we have conflicts around the world. From Russia and Ukraine to increasing issues with India and Pakistan, and then of course the Israel Gaza war that's been raging on for more than a year and a half. I know that that issue in particular is important to you. You've also talked about, that you would want to adopt a sensible foreign policy. So, in particular, do you think that the Israel Gaza war is going to be a major issue in the 2026 election like it was last year? And can you just go through what your position on it is?
Yeah, no, I think it's an important issue for all of us. And, I just want to start from a basic place of principle here. If you look at our history, we spent a lot of time, effort, and resources after World War II to build what we call a rules based international order. and to support international organizations that would govern all of us to protect us from a would-be autocrat who wants to take over other people's countries. And that took the form of organizations like the UN, the WHO,
Mhm.
all of these international organizations. And the idea was that we as the United States should be first among equals. We should be
Mhm.
working with our international allies across a rules-based international order. And I think when we follow that rules-based international order, we make good decisions, a la Ukraine, right? We're working with our international allies to protect a sovereign nation against the incursion from a would-be an autocrat who would be someone who is trying to take over another foreign sovereign land. But where we've made bad decisions is when we violate the rules of the rules-based international order, whether that's Iraq, whether that's Vietnam, or
Mhm.
that's Israel. And when it comes specifically to Israel, my frustration is that there are a number of countries who we fund and subsidize their militaries just as a matter of course. That includes Israel, that includes Egypt, where my family immigrated from, that includes
Mhm.
Jordan, that includes Saudi Arabia. And I categorically don't believe that we should be in the business of subsidizing foreign militaries. Now, that is actually not an international issue. That is actually more a domestic issue. And I think about public schools across this state that I've stepped into as a function of this campaign and previous campaigns. There is not a public school I've stepped into where I couldn't identify a number of really important improvements in that school. And then I think, wow, instead of investing in this school and every school, we send tens of billions of dollars of our taxpayer, hard-earned taxpayer dollars to other militaries to drop bombs on other kids and their schools. And I just think
Well,
that's
if foreign
categorically
aid
wrong.
is only 1% of our budget.
Oh, and I have nothing against the good kind of foreign aid. I
Mhm.
do have issues with foreign military aid, which is
Mm.
substantially larger. And then not only just foreign military aid, but a substantial amount of the investment that we make in weaponry, which gets
Mhm.
tied into our defense budget, right? That ends up finding its way into the hands of foreign militaries that we just subsidize. And I'll tell you just the experience that I had as a child spending some of my summers in Egypt.
Mhm.
That money didn't make Egyptians any freer or any richer. What it did is it consolidated the power that the military had on its own people, right? And the problem with all of this money is that what it tends to do is it tends to empower would-be autocrats,
Mhm.
strongmen, people like Benjamin Netanyahu or Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in Egypt. And I don't think that benefits the people. And I think it creates situations where when your export is war or war materiel, what do you think is going to come from that? So I'd
Mhm.
much rather make our export HIV medication or educational material, right? And so,
Mhm.
I just think that we gotta be willing, if we believe in the rules-based international order, to
Mhm.
be invested in actually following the rules. And that's what I'd like to see. Now, I
Well,
certainly hope that in this 2026 election, that this is not going to continue to be a flashpoint. I hope that the seizure and the blockade that we're witnessing in Gaza ends. I hope that we come to a just peace. I hope that hostages get returned. I hope that we don't have to continue to have this conversation. I hope that our foreign policy is consistent with what we say we've wanted, right? Because every president up until this one has said that they believe in a two-state solution.
right.
And one of those states exists and the other one doesn't, right?
Right.
There is not a state of Palestine. And what's even worse is that our money is being used to foreclose on that possibility. We're aiding, arming, and abetting a small group of people around a genocidal leader in
Mhm.
Benjamin Netanyahu, right? Who is foreclosing on the possibility of what we want to exist, which is what we say a Palestinian state.
And
And so
do you believe in a two-state solution?
I believe in a solution that gives Palestinians the right to self-determination and gives
Mhm.
Israelis peace and security. And
But
it's
would
not
would
my
they
position from
would the
here.
state of Israel still exist?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
not my position from here to tell folks how to solve their problems.
Mhm.
Right? It is my position to make sure that our tax dollars aren't on the wrong side
Mhm.
of those problems. And I think
Right.
right now they have been. And so, I believe in peace. I believe that sending money to people who are waging the kind of destruction that we're seeing right
Mhm.
now is not helping the cause of peace. I believe we got to be honest about whether or not we're actually doing the things that we say we want to do, and that's the responsibility. And so I'll leave it
Right.
to folks there, but I do believe that Palestinians deserve the right to self-determination, and I do believe that Israelis deserve the right to safety and security.
Right. Um, and so, in the last election, being as you and I are both from Michigan, we saw that this was a huge division, for Democrats. And, it's pretty easy to make the argument that it ended up costing Kamala Harris the state. And there was this huge uncommitted movement in the Democratic primary back when Joe Biden was running, where over 100,000 people voted uncommitted instead of voting for the sitting president, mainly because of the Israel Gaza war. And I know you've spoken up about this, but it did seem to end up hurting Vice President Harris for her general election campaign. And a lot of people just refused to vote for her. Um, did you end up voting for her in the general?
I was the first Arab and or Muslim leader to endorse Kamala Harris,
Hmm.
and I voted for her in the general election. And
Did
that's
you find
because
it
I knew
hard to convince other people to do so? I mean, were
it.
those very difficult conversations to have with people who felt just so passionately about this issue?
I endorsed her almost immediately after she was the nominee in
Yeah,
July.
no, I mean, but it
And
was such an
and
emotional issue
it
for
was.
so many people in Michigan.
And I'll be honest with you, I thought the way that she ran on the issue was disastrous, and I tried to
Okay.
tell her that. And at the same time, I thought that a lot of the ways that the Arab and Muslim community was engaging on the issue was also disastrous. So it was a
Mhm,
very frustrating 4 months trying to have conversations with folks who were implacable. I do want to just, I want to speak to this pain though for a minute, right?
mhm,
Because it's very difficult when people see loved ones or kids who look like their own kids
mhm.
bombed into smithereens by our tax dollars to focus on anything else, right?
Right.
If you ask yourself, how many children died at the wrong end of our tax dollars, and
Mhm,
the people who say that they want your vote won't
mhm,
even pay attention or speak to the issue, that's
mhm.
deeply painful.
Right.
Donald Trump has been a complete failure on this and so many other issues, and I knew that that was the case, which is the
Mhm,
reason why I endorsed Vice President Harris. And then I literally, like, 2 sides of the phone, right? On the one side, having conversations with the Harris campaign, telling them, "Hey, if you're not able to show some different distance between Biden's disastrous handling of this policy, I worry a lot that it's gonna be
mhm.
almost impossible to get the Arab or Muslim community to come and support you." And then talking to leaders in the Arab and Muslim community saying, "Hey, don't you forget that the first
Mhm.
thing that Donald Trump did the first time he got elected was try and ban people from places that you and your family have come from
Right.
coming to this country." Right?
Right.
That he's gonna shred the Constitution as he has,
Mhm.
literally erasing people because they signed on to an op-ed demanding Palestinian rights, which has been
Yeah.
the stated public policy of our country for a very long time.
Mhm,
And the frustration was feeling like I was caught in the middle. Now,
mhm,
what I tried to do was the best that I could, which is to say, I need to do all I can to help to prevent Donald Trump from being elected, right?
mhm,
Both for the well-being of everybody in our country and for the well-being of people in Gaza. And I also need to get, right? Um, need to get our community to recognize that a vote is not really about the past, it's about the future, right? And I
mhm.
think had we had a different president, we'd be in a very different situation when it comes to
Right.
basic rights for public policy and, frankly, the
Yeah.
situation in Gaza. But it was a very, very untenable position. And what I'm asking
Mhm,
moving forward here is that Democrats need to stop being the party of war. Like, I remember voting for Barack Hussein Obama back in 2008. I was very, very proud of that vote. I was so excited to vote for him.
because
And I
he
was
was
so
against
excited
the Iraq war.
for a lot of reasons, but
Mhm,
partly because he was the one who was willing to step up and say the obvious thing about Iraq when
mhm,
even then Democrats didn't have the courage to say it. And we
mhm,
all saw that that was a disaster over time.
mhm,
And that takes courage. But I don't know what's happened over the past 17 years where we've stopped being the party that has the courage to call out the destruction of children. And
mhm,
I don't understand why my party's gone so wrong. I have theories about the
mhm,
role that MAGA billionaires have played to try and make sure that they silence anybody who's willing to speak up about the
mhm,
destruction of those children over there. But hey, we used to be
mhm.
the party of courage on peace, and I
Right.
want us to be that party again.
And, we've also seen that Elon, was sending out a lot of mailers to people on both sides, Jewish voters, Arab American voters, where he was playing both sides of the issue, trying to stoke, hatred and division. And seems like, there was some success with that. I was really struck because a few weeks ago we had journalist Tim Mack on, and he's based in Ukraine, and he was telling us about the conversations that he had with people there, and they were very, they were actually very disenchanted with Biden because they felt like he was just helping enough so that they didn't get annihilated instead of helping them win the war. And so even though, they may not have been fans of Trump, that they, you know, uh, we're thinking, how bad could it really be? And so then, we've seen how bad it can get, both with Gaza, both with Ukraine. And these may not be the choices that any of us want, but there are these real world consequences. And so, I think it's important to talk about these moral issues and these foreign policy issues, because it may be around the globe, but these are universal issues that we all care about. And I appreciate that. And I know that you need to go.
Yeah.
You are traveling around the state, and I appreciate that. I so appreciate you being here. I hope that you'll come by again. We can chat some more about healthcare because there's so much more for us to talk about with RFK Jr. and everything that he's doing. But thank you so much, Abdul.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate you. And best of continued luck to all the folks out there. If you guys are interested in getting involved, abdulforsenate.com. I hope that you'll reach out, volunteer, drop us a couple bucks. But also grateful to you for creating this space, a really thoughtful conversation, and look forward to coming back again.
Thank you so much. Bye.